Hello and welcome to News in Depth on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Heavy fighting continues across eastern Ukraine as Russia signals possible new involuntary call-ups amid mounting losses. Geneva peace talks have ended without a breakthrough, and proposals for a demilitarized zone in the Donbass resurface. What is really happening on the ground and in Kyiv? Well, to lay it out for us, we're joined by Katerji, TVP World correspondent. Oz, welcome. I know it's a little bit chilly at the moment for you, so we'll try and keep this brisk and warm you up.
Good, thanks. Great to be here, Ashim.
Kick off with a soundbite and then I'll get your view on it.
Roger that.
I'm sure people are tired, civilians are tired, the military is tired, and the country's leadership is tired. Everyone feels this fatigue, but everyone wants the war to end. I'm sure of that. The main question for us is, at what price? A ceasefire, I think everyone would agree to that. And then a reassessment of further actions, agreements, and so on. But loss of territory? Let's say we will not give anything away. I'm sure of that. Every Ukrainian you ask will tell you the same. No one will give anything away just like that.
Okay, before we get to the question of giving up land, what can you share with us about the situation on the front line, Oz?
Well, we have seen a lot of movement on the maps within the last couple of weeks. Some of that down to the fact that Russians are no longer able to use Starlink for their command and control. But look, a lot of that has been over-reported because the Russians claim to make advances that they don't actually hold. And the maps move accordingly. So what we've seen within the last couple of weeks is a lot of those maps being corrected to their current lines. So it might look like on the map there's been some significant movement, but really no real territory has exchanged hands at all. Just the mapping is just becoming more closer in line with reality. That's to be said, though, the Ukrainians are making some movements on some fronts, and the Russians are continuing to throw men into frontline positions, trying to capture more territory and taking huge losses. The number of Russian losses are still as high as they have been throughout the winter, and the Russians have very little to show for it so far.
Yeah, I want to talk about losses, Russian losses in just a second. So from what you say, it sounds like pretty much a stalemate on the front lines. No one's really moving forward at any pace, and people are dying in this meat grinder, as they call it.
Well, stalemate is a term that would maybe imply that there's no movement at all. I think dynamic stalemate is a term that's more preferred in this particular situation, because there is movement. People are, both sides are making small tactical movements across that very large front line, but we aren't really seeing anything on the levels of any kind of breakthrough for either side.
Okay, now, what about the weaponry and the equipment that the Ukrainian military has? Do they have enough of it? I mean, I know there's always a shortage of air defense capability, but generally, what's their situation?
Well, you hit upon it there. The big thing that the Ukrainians need is help in the field of air defense. As it comes to other stuff, obviously, artillery shells, ammunition is the big thing, and Ukraine could always use some more heavy armor, heavy artillery. But there haven't been these large-scale armored assaults taken by either side, really, in significant numbers. So the need for more heavy armor and sort of tanks and so on isn't currently a pressing need on the front line. That's not to say Ukrainians don't need them or want them, but they just aren't the most critical things, those being air defense interceptors and also artillery shells are always important here on the battlefield. Ukraine, that Czech initiative sending millions of shells, clearly very important, but the Ukrainians need far more from that. What they really need is production in Europe and beyond to ramp up to try and meet the need that Ukraine has here on the battlefield.
Now, in terms of attacks on civilian infrastructure and buildings, accommodation, Has the loss of Starlink technology made any difference to the volume of those attacks?
No, I mean, Starlink technology was being used in some of those drones, but not with regularity. Those drones were special cases doing special things on the battlefield. So they weren't being used on every Shahed drone, as it were. If they were, that would have made it a lot more expensive for Russia to manufacture these Shahed drones. So I don't think we're going to see any kind of impact on the sort of long-distance strike capabilities of Russia because of Starlink, but we are going to see some more difficulties for Russian troops on those frontline areas where electronic warfare, signal jamming is a big issue. That's where Starlink really comes into use because signal jamming is in effect all across the front line.
Okay, now I'd like to talk about the Russian losses. As you say, they've been huge for many months now, and we're hearing rumours of involuntary call-ups. What can you tell us about those?
Well, I mean, we've heard some rumours, but nothing official about that. We do know that mobilization in Russia, like the last one we saw, would be very politically unpopular, and that's something that Putin has tried to avoid. So far, they've been managing to meet their recruitment expectations. What we have heard within the last few weeks from the Ukrainian side and from Western intelligence assessments that they are seeing that the Ukrainians are now killing more, or rather causing more casualties to Russia than they are able to recruit. So that tipping point might force Putin's hand, maybe. But again, nothing beyond rumours to confirm whether or not there is going to be any kind of mobilization.
Right. Well, nonetheless, Putin is showing no signs of wanting a sustainable peace in Ukraine. And, the issue of turning the Donbass region into a demilitarized zone has arisen again. Is this a likelihood from what you are hearing?
Well, look, this from the reporting, this seems to be an American proposal, but neither the Ukrainians would obviously prefer that to being forced to withdraw from Donetsk and Luhansk, which is something they've categorically refused to do. But the problem is for this proposal is the Russians don't have any interest in it. This free economic zone would also require the Russians to withdraw their equipment from those areas, and there's no indication that the Russians are prepared to make any concessions like that, even if the Americans are keen on the proposal.
Okay, now, just very quick one. How would you assess the level of morale amongst the military and amongst civilians that you talk to in Ukraine?
Well, we had those vox pops at the start of the show. That gives you a good indication of just how people feel. We've also had recent polling from the Kyiv Institute for Sociology. They've been doing a lot of polling, so do check out their work too if you want to know what Ukrainians think about various things. We do know that the Ukrainians are tired of the war. They are exhausted. They do want to see a negotiated end to the war. But when you dig into those numbers, you find out that the Ukrainians aren't willing to concede land for those kinds of agreements made with Russia. The other thing is they don't trust any signed deal with Russia because Russia has repeatedly violated deals that it has signed with Ukraine. So the Ukrainian people are in a difficult position. Their opinions on things obviously matter a great deal, but whether the war or not carries on is out of their hands. It's solely in the hands of Vladimir Putin, who could end the war at any time. And the question for the Ukrainians is, do they fight or capitulate? And it's unsurprising that for most Ukrainians, they choose to fight on.
Right. Well, talking about the conversation around peace talks, the Geneva peace talks have just ended, trilateral, Russian, Ukrainian and American. President Zelensky had this to say about that.
Today, we held several detailed discussions with our team at the negotiations in Geneva. It was the second day of meetings, both in a trilateral format and in other formats. Ukraine is interested in achieving results. As of now, we cannot say the outcome is sufficient. The military representatives discussed certain issues seriously and substantively. However, sensitive political questions, possible compromises, and the necessary meeting of leaders have not yet been sufficiently addressed. We count on the next meeting, and I believe it would be right for it to take place as early as February. It is important that European representatives were present. France, the United Kingdom, Germany, Italy, and Switzerland as the host country. Ukraine has always insisted that Europe must be part of the process. I want to thank the United States of America for hearing this position. I also tasked the delegation with advancing the humanitarian track. We need exchanges of prisoners of war and the release of civilians.
Right, so that's President Zelensky's assessment of the Geneva peace talks, and it must be pointed out here that of those two-day peace talks, the second day lasted only for 2 hours when both parties ended. So it didn't look particularly promising. What do you make of what President Zelensky has said on there just now?
I think reading in between the lines, Zelensky stressing the importance of Europe being there is very clear, because Europe is really speaking out for Zelensky, speaking up for Zelensky and Ukraine with regards to these negotiations. And the Americans are trying to put pressure on Zelensky to make concessions to the Russians, while the Russians are willing to concede nothing, as it seems, and there seems to be no real pressure being put on the Russians in these negotiations. That said, there have been some indications of pressure put on the Russians by the Trump administration. Those sanctions brought on Russian oil companies, for example, have really hurt the Russian economy. But with regards to the kind of pressure that Donald Trump's been putting on Zelensky personally to try and make concessions that would make Russia happy, we've seen none of that being brought to bear onto the Russians. So the Ukrainians are in a very difficult position. They have to demonstrate their seriousness in these negotiations with Russia and for the White House. But beyond that, they aren't really in a position where they can afford to concede these things that Russia is demanding. That would be politically suicidal for the Ukrainians, and giving up territory that would open the doorway to a further invasion would be militarily suicidal for the Ukrainians. So Zelensky's government isn't about to make any suicidal decisions in these negotiations, but they are obviously in a difficult position, which is why it sounds like it's so important from Kiev's perspective to have Europe also around the table at the same time.
Right, well, it sounds as though America's mediation in these peace talks is not really moving the needle. How are these peace talks being viewed in Ukraine?
Well, again, you know, the people are in a very difficult position here in Ukraine, because they don't really have the choice in this. They have two options, whether that's fight on or agree to all of Russia's demands. So
do they have confidence that they will come to fruition?
The difficult position that Ukraine is in.
Oh, sorry to interrupt you, but do they have confidence?
Kiev Institute for Sociology.
Do they have confidence that peace talks will come to fruition of some description that's acceptable?
That's difficult to tell. I don't think anyone at the moment really considers that peace is imminent, to put it that way. Whether or not something is ironed out within the next few weeks, potentially months, I think people are hopeful of that. But again, the big issue goes back to trust. The main issue is Ukrainians don't trust Russia's president to keep to any agreement. And because of that, I don't think there is a lot of hope that something concrete is about to be struck.
Right. Now, one other thing that President Zelensky said after those peace talks was that some progress had been made on the military line, but very little on the political line. What do you think he meant by that?
Well, he did clarify that, he's talking about things like how to monitor a potential ceasefire. And, the Ukrainian military and the Russian military have been talking to each other on several issues, such as prisoner swaps in the past. This isn't something new. It's actually easier for the militaries to talk to each other than it is for the politicians to talk to each other. So on this issue, it's very, very technical discussions about monitoring a potential ceasefire. So there aren't major stumbling blocks in those discussions because for both sides, they want the same sort of thing with regards to monitoring, as it were. But when it comes to the politics, it's a very, very different matter. The Russians still have very maximalist demands, and the Ukrainians obviously don't want to give up their territory or their sovereignty.
Yeah, so it seems as though peace talks, however they are monitored, that question doesn't really come into focus until we have some kind of peace in place. And with the political challenges that are currently being faced by the parties, that doesn't look very likely in the short term. Oz, thank you very much indeed for sharing that analysis with our audience. Now, hurry up and get warm soon and stay safe.
Thanks, Ashim.
Cheers. And that brings us to the end of this episode of News in Depth. Don't go away, lots more coming up. Goodbye.